Today on HR Trends.
So one of the things that I think has been surprising for a lot of executives is when organizations are more effective at meeting the mental health needs, the family needs, the community needs of their employees, those employees perform at a higher level. They are less likely to quit. They are more engaged with their work. They sleep better at night, and the list goes on and on. So not only by doing those things, do we help the lives of our employees, by helping the lives of our employees, we help the performance of our organizations.
You know, Brian, as you say that, I'll bring a quote from my 7-year-old, which I have no idea where she got it from, but she says, "Don't talk about it, be about it." Right? Don't talk about it, be about it. And when I think about, Unum, and in this moment that we're having, we're really at the center of COVID as an insurance company. Right, we're at the center of the lives of family members, of caregivers, of employees, and some of the stats that, just make you pause when you think about that balloon that you've just talked about and how full it is. There's been, from 2019 to 2021, 22% increase in life insurance claims paid. Life insurance claims, right? So this is somebody who's passed away. 37% increase in disability claims paid, 55% increase in leaves administered. And I've already mentioned the 50% growth in Unum disability claims related to anxiety. So when you think about that balloon, when you think about offering time, when you think about what's happening in the background of people's lives and what they've faced and may likely still be thinking about and is top of mind, those topics are real. This is somebody who's passed away. This is somebody who has had a major life event. And so we've always existed as an organization to help the world thrive in life's moments. And at this moment, perhaps, we are in a profound sort of touchstone of how we show up and how companies like us show up for those people.
Welcome to HR Trends. I'm your host, Claire Morin, and today we have two extraordinary guests talking to us about their insights around attracting, retaining, and protecting employees in this new world of work. We have with us Brian Kropp, Chief of Research and Distinguished Vice President at Gartner. You've seen his byline before. He's somebody to follow on LinkedIn. Brian, we're so excited you're with us today.
Great, thanks for having me.
We also have Polly Nicholas, the Senior Vice President of Unum Solutions. With more than 20 years of experience driving growth and operational improvements and a real passion for connecting people, purpose, and results, Polly is now leading Unum's rapidly expanding solutions business. And I just have to say, Polly, I have to embarrass you here because you're really one of these new leaders we're hearing about who is visionary, compassionate, and really understands how to motivate people through purpose. So welcome, Polly.
Thrilled to be here, Claire. Thank you.
So Brian, let's start with you. You have this extraordinary role where you're overseeing the work of something like more than 300 HR researchers around the world. I think you call it your HR nerdatorium. Can you briefly just tell us, what is this work you're overseeing?
Yeah, and I mean that with the most compassion and respect I possibly can. We within Gartner in our HR practice have hundreds of researchers, advisors, data analysts, you name it, across the globe. And just to give you a sense of what we're able to do, we survey, 1 million, 1 million, 2 people per year. We do interviews with more than 1,000 HR executives per year. We download a copy of every job posting on the internet to analyze what companies are looking for in terms of skills, compensation, all those sorts of things. And then we get together and we try to figure it out in our very nerdy, geeky, graduate school sort of way. And so that's why I call it our little nerdatorium, because we get some of the smartest people in the world together trying to solve and figure out some of the hardest problems. And we love it. And part of the reason why I love it is, one, it's just fun to be able to do that with a great group of people. But two, HR and talent and the people at all the organizations that we work with, it is far and away the distinguishing characteristic of those organizations that are successful and those that aren't. And we're able to play a little bit of a role in helping all of those HR executives attract, develop, retain, manage the lives of their employees. And it's important to think about it as their lives, not just their jobs. And so we're able to have a positive impact on millions and millions of people who happen to be working for all of these companies across the globe every year. And it's just incredibly rewarding to be in the center of all that with a group of just really great, smart people to make it happen.
It's wonderful. And it's such a limelight, isn't it, that the world you're researching and the importance of retention right now. And one thing you've mentioned recently is this, how employers have changed their approach, a result of the pandemic, right? So it's no longer workers doing jobs, as you put it. It's now human beings having lives. And what do we need to do to provide for that? Can you unpack that? Because it feels so important for right now.
Yeah. There's lots of stuff that we've learned across the last handful of years and along all sorts of different dimensions. And the best way I can frame it is to share with you a little bit of a story about a conversation I had with one of the CFOs that we work with. And this CFO is like Hollywood central casting CFO. Like if you were to call Hollywood and say, find me grumpy CFO, they'd be like, I know the guy. They've got the guy, and he called me one day and he's like, hey, Brian, I've learned something. I'm like, what is it? And I'm wondering to myself, oh, this is something about GAAP accepted accounting principles, finance manipulation, where you can eke out another penny per share. And he's figured it out before anybody else. I was expecting something like that. He goes, Brian, I've learned something. I'm like, what? He goes, there's people that work for me. And then took a second. I was like, yes, there are. He goes, no, you're not understanding. I'm like, they're people. He goes, I've seen into their lives. I realize that they have like families and challenges and real things are going on. And if I treat them like people, it's actually better. And he had this realization and he just captured it so well. And something that we picked up from then, it's just this really radical idea that companies don't have workers. We don't have cogs in a machine that we can just swap in and out. We have people and human beings that happen to be working for us at that point in their life for part of their day. And when we take a step back and appreciate that they existed before they started working with us, they'll exist after they start working with us, they've got real lives that impact things in work, but are really describing who they are and capturing everything about them, from their friends, their families, their hobbies, their churches, their communities, their sports teams, whatever it might be. And when we take this step back and treat those people that happen to be working for us like human beings, and where work is part of their life, not a separate thing from their life that has to be balanced in a work-life balance sort of way, but you've got a life where work is part of your life, and how do you support that person's work in a way that improves their life is really, I think, the most important lesson from the pandemic about their health, their mental health, their physical health, their families, their communities. And now as we move into a world of hybrid work, how do we support them when those things become even blurrier than we've ever seen them before? But the biggest takeaway for us within Gartner and me personally is just this radical idea that there's human beings who happen to be working for us, and all of the implications from that very basic, somewhat obvious thing to say, but still at the same time incredibly profound. And when you've got Mr. Grumpy CFO realizing that, you realize how important this shift is and how fundamental the shift is in terms of how this relationship between companies and the human beings that happen to be working for those companies truly is.
It's wonderful. And Polly, I know this is very close to your heart. You've been nodding a lot. Your thoughts on this?
Yes, Brian. So first of all, I love your nerdtorium, managing lives, not just work, right? Like that is the important work ahead, and it is an important work that is right now. Now more than ever, as I think about some of the information you shared, employers have an opportunity, maybe even an imperative, to understand those needs of the people that they have that are part of their organizations. Work and life are deeply intertwined, and you've talked a little bit about this, and I have a common view. I believe that we are redefining that employee experience in this moment, and that the employers that invest in, all the way up to the CFO that you just talked about, invest in that experience are going to be difference makers. They're going to be the companies that succeed in the future. We have seen people's pets, as we talked about as we were preparing today, people's lives pass through the screens that are behind us. And we feel a deeper connection because of that. We are more connected to those humans we work with because we've seen how those households have new demands on them, different from what they've had before. Similar to you, I think these conversations are frankly happening in every room. I was in a room last week with some senior executives with one of the brokers that we work with. And a very, very senior female executive in the room said, by the way, guys, out loud in a room, I'm a single mom. And I am also a caregiver of my parents. And I can keep it together between now and August. Like I can keep the wheels on the bus moving together between now and August. But come August, I'm going to have a different set of needs than I've ever had before when I'm expected to be back in person. And so is my child going to be back in person. And what that said to me was this story needs to be echoed in not just the day-to-day for our people so they understand that it's okay to say those things out loud. It's also important to create experiences at work that people can articulate those needs and then create solutions that allow us to meet those needs. One of the things that SHRM recently published and cited that the second most important benefit for employers was time off and flexible work and leave, putting retirement in sixth place. That is quite a material shift in how we think about the needs of employees and how much they're changing. And frankly, the need for solutions. So not just products, but complete programs that are brought together that really deliver a different set of value.
What are your thoughts on that, Brian?
Yeah, no, it's totally true. We phrase and think about this in a lot of ways, like through the lens of the pandemic, and that the pandemic was a key factor. And that's absolutely true. But I think the pandemic accelerated a trend that was already occurring in a variety of fronts. So if you think back to even beforehand, there was a lot of conversations about bringing your whole self to work. And part of bringing your whole self to work is, whatever it might be about your sexuality, your family, your ethnicity, your experiences of being part of different marginalized groups, if that's part of your experience, and so on. So that was going on in the background. The pandemic put a bigger spotlight on all the things that were unique about us as individuals. And then when you put all of that together, the big thing that people started to realize is when you meet these needs, it's not just a good thing to do as one human being to another human being to help someone out. It actually translated to real business and talent outcomes. So one of the things that I think has been surprising for a lot of executives is when organizations are more effective at meeting the mental health needs, the family needs, the community needs of their employees, those employees perform at a higher level. They are less likely to quit. They are more engaged with their work. They sleep better at night, and the list goes on and on. So not only do we by doing those things, do we help the lives of our employees? By helping the lives of our employees, we help the performance of our organizations. In the past, we thought about this as I choose A or B. If I'm helping their lives, they're not going to work as hard. Or if I'm getting them to work harder, it's just going to be at the cost of their life. That's actually wrong thinking. It's more of a virtuous circle than we ever realized. And alternatively, a vicious circle if we don't manage it correctly, that if we damage our employees' lives in the long haul, that's going to have a damage for their work and so on. But if we think about this as a virtuous circle, they help each other. They're not at odds with each other. And that, I think, is probably one of the most important lessons that we've learned. By helping those human beings that happen to be working for us, we actually help our organization perform and be more effective in the long run.
So fascinating. And Polly, I'd love you talk a lot about these trends, right, of how employers are showing up to care for their employees. Could you kind of just add to that?
I will add to that, and maybe just getting to business results. One of the things that Aon did, they produced a 2021 total well-being survey, and they talked just about what you talked about, Brian, the actual results to businesses when you connect total well-being and resiliency together. And they really take that concept and they talk about customer satisfaction improvement. They talk about customer retention. They talk about NPS. They talk about profit. And the reason that that matters is because there is that direct connection. It's no longer an or, it's an and. The Corey Berry, the CEO of Best Buy, did a recent podcast with Outside In, and she talks about this concept, which I love, which is putting scaffolding around her people and ensuring that that's life scaffolding, thinking about how you create the things that people need when they need them. In our recent customer research and in some of the data that we have, a few things become very, very clear. One is, CFOs need to understand how the investments they're making in their people will drive financial results. And so that direct connection continues to be important. But they are having the, epiphanies, if you will, that their people matter. So they're looking and interested in a paved road. The second thing is that employees across the board are saying, my company's benefits, they're using the word benefits, need to represent the values I have. They are an indicator of who I am. And so how my employer communicates, produces, and puts solutions, if you will, in front of me in our HR terms matters, because it's the reason I stay or it's the reason I go. And so that becomes a really interesting, different conversation in this great reshuffle. Brian, you look like you were about to jump in.
For sure. One of the things that I think is really interesting here as well is our definition of an employee. We need to think differently about it, which is, yes, there's lots of things we can do and historically have done from a benefits and support perspective of helping that person and helping that person's immediate family, usually with physical health, healthcare related things, and so on. And that's great. And it's wonderful, and we shouldn't do those sorts of things. But our definition of what support means for that individual has been changing to move into places like mental health, all sorts of different places there. But also, I think even more profound is our definition of family and where we're supporting has changed. Because what some of the smartest, most progressive organizations are doing is not just helping from a physical health perspective, that immediate family, but supporting everyone in that community from an even broader perspective. Let me give you some examples of what I mean. There's several companies that we're working with now. What they have done is expanded their learning and development solutions, their e-learning modules, their certification programs, whatever it might be, not just to the people who work for them, but the spouses of the people that work for them, the kids of the people that work for them. And the reason why is if you've got a spouse or a child that is having a difficult time finding a job, that puts enormous stress on the employee. And if you as an employer can help that spouse or children of that family or loved ones find a job, that's good for that family. Here's another example. There's companies that have been wondering what to do with all of their real estate, given that they're adopting hybrid ways of working and creating a lot of open space there. And they can't get out of their leases overnight, but you have a lot of space. And so they're trying to use that space for either things to support needs in the community, or there's one company that we work with that has opened up a lot of their office space to schools to enable more social distancing in those schools. So kids go to school at the office rather than in their school, but they can spread out to a greater degree, and it makes it safer and healthier there. So where we're really seeing companies expand their belief is not just, we used to have dental health, and now we have even better dental health. But thinking about the family holistically, thinking about that community, thinking about all the different dimensions along which that support could exist. And what's also really interesting is that employees are becoming increasingly accepting of having their employer play a deeper, more involved role in their life. And that line about where, as people and companies have gotten more enmeshed, that line of where support starts and stops has been changing and evolving. And it's pushed much farther where employees and those human beings are just more accepting of having their employer know more about them and support them in ways that we couldn't have imagined, even 5 years ago.
It's so true. And Polly, I must punt this over to you. And if you could also respond to that, but also speak to what you're doing with Unum Solutions, which is very much around this employee experience, right?
Yes, Brian, you just hit on a number of things that probably we could talk for another 2 hours. But let me get to a couple of key highlights that I think matter. When we think about leave and time off is often about the family. I talk about it in that same way. If I am taking time off, it might not be because I just need the time off. It might be that the care of a family member is in need. 41% of U.S. adults report symptoms of anxiety or depression. Right? There's your example of it's family. That isn't just the employee that's at work. That is the community. And when you go into the adolescent space, you see even a greater need. So maybe my need for time off is to care for my child. In 2019 through 2021, Unum saw a 50% growth in disability claims. So when you think about people taking time off, the usage, the consumption, the understanding of the importance of benefits that, frankly, maybe 2.5 years ago, most folks didn't even think about, was critical and now have become critical. And so at Unum Solutions, that's exactly what we're thinking about. We're thinking about how do we show up with really end-to-end solutions for that individual that is taking time off, whether it be to care for that elder, to care for that child, or to care for themselves. And those needs are about, really two things. One is meeting people where they are. So thinking instead about these frameworks of benefits and regulation and compliance, but instead thinking about the consumer. I'm a happen to be a daughter of two mothers, if you will, who are both aging and insisting and living in their own homes that they've lived in, and they're in their mid 80s. It's a great example of where we need to show up and think about what I need and people just like me need when they're going through that experience. As we've talked to employers and as we've sat in some recent strategy discussions, a couple of key highlights that I think have come through. One is HR has a bigger seat at the table than they've ever had before. They have a louder voice, and the importance of the solutions that they put in front of their executive team matter more today than they ever have before. And with potentially increased wallet share and key decisioning, they're really looking for those end-to-end programs that really can help their people. And they're really in this difficult and challenging place of thinking about, gosh, labor costs are rising. The great reshuffle is underway. Attraction and retention matter. So how do I prioritize and articulate to my executive team how I'm going to help create solutions that I've never thought of before, or am just coming out of the pandemic with a few minutes to think about? And so as people are planning for 2023, yes, we are already planning for 2023, I think we're watching customers really ask a different set of questions maybe than they've asked before around these ideas of behavioral health, of time off, of advertising and thinking about communicating benefits holistically to serve that family, as you've talked about, Brian, to serve that community, arguably, too, and how they're thinking about how their community values and their people values come together and make an impact.
Yeah. I think one of the most fascinating things when you start to look into the future a little bit, we're starting to see glimpses of it. And you were alluding to, I think, a thread within that, which is just this question of time. And we've been thinking about it historically as, we give people time off for vacation, we give people time off for health-related things, increasingly giving them time off to take care of family members. But it just begs this question when we think about what we've learned over the pandemic, the importance of time. And one of the things that we've learned with hybrid work and remote work is that people just started naturally working at different times. They became more productive when they had more control over what time they actually started to work at. We also have learned that there's lots of people out there that want to have a different relationship with their employer, maybe work 80% of the time for 80% of the pay. There's experiments that are going on now with 32-hour work weeks. We'll see what happens with this legislation in California, if it passes or not, who knows. But I think it all speaks to this bigger question, which is, one of the most effective ways we can support our employees, compete to attract and retain them, is to think fundamentally differently about this question of time. And do we actually need people working, 8:30 to 5:30, 5 days a week? I think we've learned, and we've got lots of data and evidence now to say that there's lots of people that can be productive working in different ways. And the employers that don't just think about adopting flexibility around where people work. And we've learned that you can be highly productive from lots of different places. And if you get together at least occasionally, you're generally fine. But much more flexibility about when people are working, letting people work early in the day, take 2 or 3 hours off during the middle of the day, whatever it might be. But now this next big question of changing how much do people work? And one of the, I think, most lasting, profound implications that's going to be going forward in terms of how we support our employees is giving them the gift of time to a much greater degree, to let them engage in things that make the most sense for them in the way that makes the most sense for them. Because when you think back to it and you ask the question, which is, well, why do we work, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday? And you actually unpack that, what you get to is, well, when we first started going to working in manufacturing places and plants and assembly lines and all that sort of stuff, there wasn't enough lighting and enough electricity to have lighting for everybody to see. So that's generally when you had enough light coming in from outside where you could still work on the assembly line without it being totally dark or powering everything by candles. And then that's how we just kept working as we moved from, assembly lines to working in an office to now working in a hybrid world. And as soon as you start to realize, well, we actually have enough electricity to power the lights. Maybe we can work differently and we can break free from a lot of these just really, in what we can observe now, are just arcane ways of working that were based on a totally different type of technology and a totally different type of work and a totally different type of world that we never had the courage as a society to break free from. So the combination of that, they realize the importance of one of the most powerful things we can give to our employees is time. We will see, I believe, kind of 2, 3, 4 years from now, all these experiments that are occurring right now on how much and when people are working become normal. And we're just going to see massive variability around the schedules that people have. And those schedules are going to align with the needs to take care of a child, a parent, their hobbies, their exercise, whatever it might be. And we're just going to be in a world that's gone from very predictable, very consistent, to a world that's going to become highly variable, both based upon where, when, and how much people are working. And then the needs of HR executives to meet that variability, I think, is going to be an incredibly defining characteristic of the best HR executives. They figured out ways to make that happen through work, through benefits, through support, whatever it might be. But if you can figure that out as an HR executive, you're going to be incredibly privileged by having a workforce that is much easier to attract, retain, develop, and grow.
I could just talk to you both for hours. I'd love for us to land around there, which is this idea of how do you prevent burnout? Like, how do you sustain resiliency, right? Which is, to your point, like, everything is so very different now. There's also some tendencies of overwork, right? And how do you make sure people are at that sweet spot? And Polly, I wonder if we can just start with you around, say, behavioral health. I know Unum's just conducted some research, it's got some new data in of what are employers doing to help those really crisis levels of mental health right now.
Yes, yeah, happy to share a little bit about what's happening in the behavioral health space, and also maybe just a quick comment on this idea of changing constructs, right? So, even the leave and time off conversation used to be this big block of people who just needed to take time off. And tomorrow it's about a persona. And it is actually how we begin to shift from thinking about leave policies and compliance to what does a person need who's planning a leave? What does a person need when they have a very unplanned event and there's an emergent moment happening? How are those needs different, and how are we surrounding them? Again, back to Corey Berry's sort of scaffolding. How are we surrounding them? Because there is this opportunity to begin to think differently about solutions that do just that. When we think about mental health, what we are seeing is that 90% of employers and employees are saying, this is a benefit that I need, and it is one of the most important benefits that I need to offer. Now, you sort of stop there and you get a bit of a pregnant pause, because the answer is we need it, but we don't understand necessarily how to apply it, how to talk about it, and how to deliver it in our workplace. We agree it's important. Can somebody shape how it's important? And that's exactly the thinking we've been doing when we think about behavioral health, because it truly needs to be that end-to-end solution. It isn't just an app. While that's a great start on your phone, it's about enabling executive teams to be vulnerable and talk about their imperfections, and doing that in a way to model behavior. It's about helping those frontline managers who are actually the people having those day-to-day conversations with some tools and capabilities that they must have in order to help their people. One of the examples that I recently heard was having a conversation instead of engagement or an engagement interview, having it be a stay interview. Why do you stay? What matters to you? What are the things that keep you here? And how do I seek to understand those things better so I can begin to create a stay program for you and for your people? And behavioral health, again, continues to be just that. We had a recent client that came back, and one of their employees actually said out loud, "This is the program we've been waiting for the last 2 years. I couldn't be more excited about the opportunity and the commitment my company has to my total well-being." And it isn't just about mental health, it's about my health, my financial security, and my total well-being that really need to come together.
Brian, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that too.
Yeah, this question of resiliency is so interesting. When I think back to 2020, one of the questions that came up in almost every conversation we had with all the different HR executives we work with or the concerns was, I'm really concerned about my employees' resiliency. And then when you say, well, like, are they not resilient? They're like, no, they figured out a way through. They were incredibly resilient. And so you really have to get to that next question, which was resiliency at what cost? And one of the I think biggest lessons that executives hopefully have learned across the last couple of years is that a lot of our mindset a couple of years ago was maximize efficiency, get everything just or get everything just to the moment of we're stripping costs out of everything. Everything's at 100%, and that's what we thought good management and leadership looked like. What we've realized, though, is that mindset is a lot like having a balloon and trying to say, my management leadership strategy is inflate that balloon with as much air as possible, right up to the point where it breaks. And that strategy is fine if there's nothing in the environment around us that could cause a balloon to break. What we've realized is there's lots of things in the environment around us that can cause balloons to break. So supply chain breakdowns, global pandemics, wars in Europe that we thought were not going to happen anymore. And the list can go on and on and on and on. And so when we have a management strategy and management philosophy, which is maximize efficiency, we're actually also unwittingly maximizing fragility. And whenever something happens when we're maximizing efficiency, we're like that balloon where any little prick against it is going to cause it to break. And that's the same thing with our employees. It's that when we're trying to maximize efficiency through them exclusively all of the time, it's going to cause them to break and pop like that balloon. And what we need as a leadership and management philosophy is to lead like a half or 3/4 or 80%, whatever it is, inflated balloon. And when we take that balloon and we squeeze it, and we have these external pressures that apply to it and squeeze it because something happens, supply chain breaks down, customer fires us, whatever it might be, and we squeeze it, put that pressure on it, the balloon doesn't pop. The air just goes to another place. So it's still a balloon. But that's when we're thinking about resiliency, what we need to have is, are we thinking about this as a balloon that we've maximized that's really fragile, or a balloon that's 80%, 90% full that we can squeeze or get squeezed, but it's still a balloon and doesn't pop? And that, I think, has all sorts of implications for how we think about our employees, our workforces, our businesses. Are we putting capacity in place that sometimes is intentionally idle to make sure that we're not fragile? And this whole theory of management and leadership across the last decade plus of maximize efficiency, I think, is slowly getting replaced by maximize resilience. And resilience is that 90% inflated balloon. That doesn't mean we've got 10% there that keep spare, that we always fill up when that moment occurs, but sometimes we keep it empty on purpose. We might lose $1 or $2 here by that sort of approach, but we're not going to pop when that happens. So I think that's one really important philosophy. And I think the second big thing that we need to take away as we think about this new world we're moving into when it comes to questions of resiliency and care for mental health and support for our employees. It is wonderful that we have leaders that talk about it. And that is the first step. And I think that's important. However, when we just talk about it, I don't think that's enough. I think what the best organizations do is actually use their budget dollars, their reputation, and their time, the scarce commodities and scarce resources that they have as an organization. And they use those three things, not just their voice, to make change happen. So if you're an employee, it's one thing to hear your leader say, well, I really care about your mental health. It's like, great, super, but you still have me slaved away at this laptop where you're monitoring me the whole time. You're sending me emails at 10:30 at night, and at 10:45, you're like, why haven't you responded? Like, no. What we have to use is our budget dollars, our time, our reputation to make these changes, because if we're just talking about it, employees, it's very easy for them to be like, yeah, whatever, that's just the boss saying words again. But when you put your budget, time, reputation against it, then employees say, well, this must really matter. And that's one of the big shifts that leaders need to be thinking about here as well. So it's great to talk about mental health. It's even more powerful to give your whole workforce a collective mental health day off once a month, right? It is important to talk about well-being for, your parents. It's more powerful to give employees money to do something about it. It's important to talk about social issues that might impact your employees. It's more important to put your company's reputation on the line to support those things that you care about. That is, I think, going to be a second big distinguishing factor of organizations that are the best here. Not the ones that talk about it, the ones who spend money, time, or their reputation on those things that they actually care about.
Brian, as you say that, I'll bring a quote from my 7-year-old, which I had no idea where she got it from, but she says, "Don't talk about it, be about it." Right? Don't talk about it, be about it. And when I think about, Unum, and in this moment that we're having, we're really at the center of COVID as an insurance company, right? We're at the center of the lives of family members, of caregivers, of employees. And some of the stats that, just make you pause when you think about that balloon that you've just talked about and how full it is. There's been, from 2019 to 2021, 22% increase in life insurance claims paid. Life insurance claims, right? So this is somebody who's passed away. 37% increase in disability claims paid. 55% increase in leaves administered. And I've already mentioned the 50% growth in Unum disability claims related to anxiety. So when you think about that balloon, when you think about offering time, when you think about what's happening in the background of people's lives and what they've faced and may likely still be thinking about and is top of mind, those topics are real. This is somebody who's passed away. This is somebody who has had a major life event. And so we've always existed as an organization to help the world thrive in life's moments. And at this moment, perhaps, we are in a profound sort of touchstone of how we show up and how companies like us show up for those people. We're combining sort of this combination of modern technology with this important magic of being there when people need us on the phone and having a guide, while providing technology that makes sense at the time that you need it. Maybe at 2 a.m. when you have a minute to come up for air because you've been caring for a loved one, you don't want to talk to somebody, you just want to digitally answer a question. But when I need a guide, I have somebody at the other end able to do that. And that balance is thinking about, again, persona, thinking about who that individual is. Are they planning? Are they having an emergent event? And the companies that really can begin to think about what is happening in the backgrounds of those videos that we've talked about, that we're all on screen with the pets and the children and the parents and the whoever coming behind the scenes, and who are really putting their dollars, as you said it, and their commitments behind solutions that will be difference makers. I really believe that those are the companies that really help the employee, the family, and the community do better and be better. those companies are going to be the ones that thrive as we move forward in the future. But that is not an easy task. That is not an easy task, and I think a lot of us need to spend and continue to spend time, just the way your notorium is, on what are the things that matter. How do we use data, qualitative and quantitative, to help the world that we live in get a little bit better at caring for the people that surround us every day.
Well, thank you both so much for such a fascinating conversation. Everybody listening, join our conversation. Subscribe to HR Trends on your favorite podcast app. You can also visit us at unum.com/HR-trends, where you'll find a library of resources on this topic and much more. Polly and Brian, so wonderful to have you with us, and really look forward to inviting you back again soon.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Claire.
Unum is a registered trademark and marketing brand of Unum Group and its insuring subsidiaries.